Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about a quiet crisis, a storm really, that's brewing in the heart of Europe. We're talking about a 3 trillion euro problem, and this isn't something that just popped up overnight. It's been building for half a century, and now it's threatening the very future of France.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this crisis, you've got to understand something crucial. There are basically two Frances. You've got the one you see on a postcard, right? But then there's the other one, the reality for millions of people who live just outside those big, shiny cities. So on one side, you've got Paris. It's this glittering center of global wealth, a total powerhouse. We're talking 75 times billion euros in luxury goods exports every year. But then you step just outside that city ring road, and it's like you've entered a different country. A country where unemployment can be over 15%, where the infrastructure is literally crumbling, and public services, well, they're just getting hollowed out. And look, this huge divide, it didn't just happen by accident, no way. It's the direct result of decades of decisions, this long-term habit of just overspending. And now, well, the bill is coming due. I mean, the scale of this problem is just staggering. France's public debt has absolutely ballooned to 3.4 trillion euros. It's tripled in just the last 25 years. And to put that into perspective for you, the interest payments alone, just the interest, now cost more than the entire country's budget for universities and research combined. Think about that. And this isn't some recent thing either. Get this, France has not had a single balanced budget since 1974. Not one. That's a 51-year habit of spending more than you bring in, all paid for by just piling on more and more debt. So, the big question is, how did France end up here? Well, it wasn't just one single thing that went wrong. It was more like a perfect storm of 3 interlocking problems. And they're all feeding off each other, pushing the country right to the edge of a reckoning. Okay, so these are the 3 big ones. You've got a demographic crisis, a major industrial decline, and a political system that seems, well, completely paralyzed, totally unable to fix the first 2. So let's break them down one by one. And we'll start with the people. This right here, this shows you the demographic time bomb in action. As that huge baby boomer generation retires, the ratio of workers to retirees is just collapsing. I mean, look at those numbers. And this puts an absolutely unbearable strain on the pension and healthcare systems, the very heart of the French social model. Now, normally, a country could maybe offset a shrinking workforce by becoming more productive, right? Each worker just creates more value. But in France, that's just not happening. Productivity growth has totally flatlined. So there's no efficiency gain to make up for the fact that there are fewer people working. It's a really vicious cycle. Okay, let's pivot to that second crisis, industrial decline. And you can see exactly why factories left. It's simple, really. French labor is the most expensive in the whole Eurozone. When you add in all the social benefits, employers are paying almost 50% on top of a worker's gross salary. That's way more than in Germany or Poland. So what happened? Well, big companies like Michelin and Renault, they just packed up and moved their factories abroad. And all of this brings us to the political crisis, which, honestly, might be the hardest one to solve. You see, the French electorate is just deeply, deeply fractured. The anti-establishment parties on both the far right and the far left now command more than half the vote. Think about that. It makes it almost impossible for any government to form a stable majority and actually pass the tough reforms that are needed. And the result? Total political paralysis. There's this constant churn at the very top, which means no leader can stick around long enough to implement any kind of long-term vision. Anytime someone tries a meaningful reform, like, say, raising the retirement age, they're met with these massive protests and huge political backlash. So, guess what? Nothing fundamental ever really changes. Now, this political gridlock, it's not just some abstract problem. It has very real-world consequences. Because at the end of the day, an economy runs on belief. It runs on trust. And for the first time in a long time, international investors, they're starting to get nervous about France. And the irony here is just so thick you could cut it with a knife. France was one of the countries that helped write the Eurozone's fiscal rules. The guardrails that are supposed to keep the whole currency stable. But now they're the ones most flagrantly breaking those rules, just blowing past the official limits on debt and deficits without even blinking. So here's the bottom line. It's getting more expensive for France to borrow money. That gap between what France pays in interest and what Germany pays, which is a really key indicator of market risk, that gap is widening. And that is a crystal clear signal that the world's belief in the French economy is really starting to crack. So, with all the traditional political paths totally blocked, where do you turn? Well, some people are looking at a pretty radical technological solution to pull France back from the brink. And it leads to a wild question. Could robots be the answer?
So the core idea here is to use technology as what's called a productivity multiplier. It's pretty simple. If you can't get more workers, you just have to make each worker you do have drastically more effective. Imagine humanoid robots that can work around the clock. In theory, they could solve the demographic crisis without anyone having to touch those politically toxic reforms.
And listen, this isn't some far-off science fiction. It's happening now. Companies are already building the tools to tackle these exact problems. We're seeing humanoid robots being designed for warehouses and logistics. We're seeing general-purpose robots that could finally bring manufacturing back home. There are even robotics as a service models that can make all this advanced automation affordable for pretty much everyone.
So all of this leaves us with one last, big, provocative question. Look, France has the skills, it has the infrastructure, it has the global influence, but it's drifting. So will it make the hard choices and embrace this technological future? Or will it just slowly decline and become the very kind of old, poor nation it once mocked? The choice, it seems, has to be made, and it has to be made soon.